I stared at the letter in my hand, feeling my blood begin to boil. The audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall of these people was truly something to behold. The Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association was demanding that I remove my boat from my lake within 48 hours or face a $500 0 cents per day fine. They even threatened to have it towed at my expense. I couldn't help but laugh as I read the condescending language dripping with artificial authority. These pompous bureaucrats had no idea who they were messing with. They had been happily using my family's lake for years without permission, and now they were trying to dictate terms to me on my own property? Oh, this was going to be interesting. Where are you watching this from, by the way? Drop a comment below, because I guarantee you're about to enjoy watching these entitled HOA tyrants get exactly what they deserve in one of the most satisfying takedowns I've ever had the pleasure of executing. My name is Jake Sullivan, and until 6 months ago, I was just another overworked software engineer grinding away in Silicon Valley. I had spent the last decade building a startup that specialized in cybersecurity solutions for financial institutions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was challenging and paid well. When a major tech conglomerate offered to buy us out for a sum with more zeros than I ever expected to see in my bank account, I decided it was time for a change of pace. I was 40 years old, financially secure, and thoroughly burned out. What I needed was peace and quiet, away from the constant hustle and endless meetings. That's when I remembered the lake house. Sullivan Lake had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather, a commercial fisherman turned conservationist, had purchased the 50-acre lake and surrounding land back in the 1950s, when the area was nothing but farmland and forests. He built a modest cabin on the shore and spent his retirement years fishing, writing, and teaching local kids about respecting nature. I still have vivid memories of summers spent at the lake with him, learning to fish and listening to his stories about the old days when the water was so clear you could see 20 feet down to the bottom. He was something of a local legend, known for standing up to a mining company that wanted to devastate the surrounding watershed. "Water is life, Jake," he'd tell me, his voice gruff but gentle, not just for fish, but for all of us. "Never let anyone tell you that profit is more important than protecting what nature gave us." Those words had stayed with me through the years, even as I had pursued my career in technology thousands of miles away. My father maintained the property but rarely used it, as his work kept him traveling. He was more of a city person anyway, never quite connecting with the lake the way my grandfather and I did. When both of them passed away within 2 years of each other, my grandfather at 92 and my father unexpectedly from a heart attack at 67, the lake and the cabin became mine. I hadn't visited in almost 5 years, busy with building my company, dealing with investors, and navigating the cutthroat tech industry, but now it seemed like the perfect refuge. I had the cabin renovated, maintaining its rustic charm while adding modern amenities like reliable internet and updated plumbing, and moved in just as winter was giving way to spring. The peace I found there was exactly what I needed. Mornings spent with coffee on the dock, afternoons working on small projects around the property, and evenings watching the sunset from my small fishing boat in the middle of the lake. The stress of meetings and deadlines gradually melted away, replaced by the rhythms of nature and the simple pleasures of lake living. It was perfect. Or at least it was, until the HOA decided to flex their muscles. That morning had started like any other. I woke with the sun, made a pot of strong coffee, and took my mug down to the dock where my 16-foot aluminum fishing boat was tied up. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, practical vessel perfect for one person to navigate the lake and do some casual fishing. It had belonged to my grandfather, and though it was a bit weathered, I'd kept it in good working condition. There was something deeply satisfying about using the same boat he had used for decades, trailing my fingers in the same water, watching the same shores. I noticed the piece of paper immediately, an obnoxious neon orange color, attached to the side of my boat with what appeared to be waterproof tape. "Violation notice," it screamed in bold black letters. I pulled it off, scanning the ridiculous content about unauthorized watercraft and aesthetic standards violations. According to this notice, my boat was inconsistent with community visual guidelines and needed to be removed from community waters. The notice also mentioned that all boats must be registered with the HOA and display appropriate community stickers. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of prank, until I walked back to the cabin and found the official letter in my mailbox, complete with HOA letterhead and the signature of one Richard Wilkins, HOA president. I was still staring at the letter when my phone rang. It was Ray Delgado, my closest neighbor and one of the few people I'd gotten to know since moving in. Ray was in his mid-70s, had known my grandfather well, and lived about a quarter-mile down the shore in a house he'd built with his own hands 50 years ago. He was a retired carpenter with calloused hands and a permanent tan from decades of outdoor work. Despite our age difference, we'd hit it off immediately when I arrived, bonding over our shared love of fishing and dislike of unnecessary rules. "Morning, Jake. I see the welcoming committee finally found you," he said with a dry chuckle when I answered. I told him about the notice and letter, and he sighed heavily. Those HOA vultures have been getting more aggressive every year. They started building that fancy development on the north side about 10 years ago, and ever since then they've been acting like they own everything within 5 miles. Your grandfather would have run them off with a shotgun full of rock salt. The image made me smile. Grandpa Sullivan had indeed been known for his direct approach to trespassers. I asked Ray if he'd had trouble with them, too. "Oh, they tried with me once about my boat shed being unsightly. I told Richard Wilkins where he could stick his violation notice. Haven't bothered me since, but they're probably just waiting for me to die so they can harass whoever buys my place. You should know they've been using your lake for their fancy fishing tournaments for years now. They even have a private club called the Elite Anglers or some pretentious nonsense. Bunch of weekend warriors in expensive gear who couldn't catch a cold if you ask me. Your grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew they were treating his lake like their personal country club." That information startled me. I hadn't thought to check if anyone was using the lake while the property was vacant, naively assuming that respect for private property still meant something. After hanging up with Ray, I did some digging online and found exactly what he was talking about. The Maple Creek Estates HOA website prominently featured photos of their annual lakeside fishing derby, with smiling men in expensive fishing gear proudly displaying their catches on my lake. Their Elite Anglers Club even had its own page, boasting about their exclusive access to prime fishing waters and upcoming events. There were dozens of photos showing large gatherings on the eastern shore of the lake, which was definitely my property, complete with tents, barbecues, and even a temporary dock they must have installed for the events. The most recent post announced their biggest tournament of the year, scheduled for the following weekend, with a $5,000 0-cents prize and a catered lakeside barbecue. They were literally planning a massive event on my property without so much as asking permission. The audacity was breathtaking. I scrolled through years of photos and announcements, growing more incredulous with each one. They had been doing this for at least 5 years, apparently taking advantage of the fact that no one was living at the cabin full-time to gradually assert control over the lake. One post even referred to Sullivan Lake as our community's crown jewel, as if they had any right to claim it. I needed advice from someone who understood the legal implications, so I called my friend Emma Porter. Emma and I had met during college and stayed in touch over the years. She was now an environmental lawyer specializing in water rights and land use issues, exactly the expertise I needed. She had been one of the few people who understood why I'd walked away from my successful tech career to live by a lake. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained the situation. "You own the lake, like actually own the deed to the lake bed and water rights, and they're telling you that you can't have your boat on it?" I confirmed that was exactly the case, and she burst out laughing. "Oh, this is too good. And they've been using it for events without permission? Jake, they don't have a legal leg to stand on. This is trespassing, plain and simple." I asked her what I should do. "Don't respond to their notice yet," she advised. "Let's gather some evidence first. If they've been doing this for years, we want to document everything before they have a chance to cover their tracks. I'll drive up this weekend and we can go through your deeds and property records to confirm everything's in order. In the meantime, maybe set up some security cameras around the lake. Something tells me this is gonna get interesting. Oh, and Jake, don't let them take your boat. If they try to remove it, that's theft, pure and simple. Make sure you document everything." I followed Emma's advice and installed wireless security cameras at strategic points around the lake, particularly focusing on the areas where the HOA seemed to hold their events, based on the photos I'd seen online. The cameras were discreet but high resolution, with night vision capabilities and motion detection that would alert me on my phone whenever someone approached the lake. I also dug through my father's filing cabinet and found all the original deeds and property documents, confirming what I already knew. Sullivan Lake was completely, unambiguously mine, including the water rights and all land 15 feet beyond the high water mark around the entire perimeter. There was even a survey map from 2010 commissioned by my father that clearly marked the property boundaries. I was still reviewing these documents when I received an email invitation to the upcoming HOA meeting. It wasn't addressed specifically to me, it seemed to be a mass email sent to everyone in the area. Curious about what these people were like, I decided to attend as an observer. It would be my first chance to see Richard Wilkins and the HOA board in action, and I wasn't going to miss it. The meeting was held in the Maple Creek Estates Community Center, an ostentatious building with columns and a fountain out front that looked like it was trying desperately to be impressive. I slipped in quietly and took a seat in the back row. About 30 people were present, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Richard Wilkins was exactly what I expected, a man in his mid-50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair, wearing a blue blazer with gold buttons and a country club smile that never reached his eyes. He ran the meeting with the self-importance of a small-town dictator, droning on about lawn height regulations and approved mailbox designs. When he finally got to the topic of lake regulations, I sat up straighter. "We've had reports of an unauthorized boat being stored on community waters," he announced, a note of annoyance in his voice. "I want to remind everyone that all watercraft must be registered with the HOA and must comply with our aesthetic guidelines. The lake is one of our community's most valuable assets, and we must maintain its pristine appearance." I couldn't help myself. I raised my hand. Richard Wilkins looked surprised, clearly not accustomed to audience participation during his monologues, but nodded in my direction. "Yes, the gentleman in the back?" I stood up, keeping my tone casual and curious. "I was wondering if you could clarify something about the lake. When you say community waters, what exactly do you mean? Who owns the lake?" A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, and I noticed a few residents turning to look at me with interest. Richard's smile tightened just a fraction. "The lake is a community resource under HOA management. It's been that way since the development was established." His tone was dismissive, clearly intending to shut down the conversation, but I wasn't finished. I pressed further. "So, the HOA has a deed to the lake? Or is it owned by the county and managed by the HOA through some kind of agreement?" Several residents were now paying close attention, and I saw one older man nodding thoughtfully at my question. Richard was getting visibly uncomfortable, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edges of the podium. "There are historical arrangements in place. The specific details aren't relevant to this meeting, but I assure you the HOA has full authority to regulate all activities on the lake." His tone had turned sharp, but I kept my expression innocently curious. "That's interesting. I'd love to see those documents sometime." Just out of curiosity. Richard quickly moved on to the next agenda item, but not before I noticed him exchanging a concerned glance with a woman I would later learn was Karen Mitchell, the HOA vice president. For the remainder of the meeting, I felt their eyes on me periodically, no doubt wondering who I was and why I was asking questions about the lake. After the meeting, as people were gathering their things and heading out, I was approached by a man who introduced himself as Gerald Thompson, president of the Elite Anglers Club. He was in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors and the confident handshake of someone used to getting his way. He wore an expensive fishing vest over a polo shirt and a hat emblazoned with the club's logo. "Haven't seen you around before, you must be new to the neighborhood," he said, sizing me up with a practiced smile. I explained that I had recently moved into my family's property on the lake. His eyebrows shot up. "The old Sullivan place? That's been empty for years. We thought it might be abandoned." There was something calculating in his expression that made me wary. I assured him it most certainly wasn't abandoned and was still very much Sullivan property. "I'm Jake Sullivan, by the way. My grandfather built that cabin." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Sullivan, of course. I met your grandfather once, years ago. Quite a character." The way he said character made it clear it wasn't a compliment. He seemed to choose his next words carefully. "Well, welcome to the area. You should know we have a wonderful fishing club. Very exclusive, but I might be able to get you in. We have access to the best spots on the lake." The irony of him offering me access to my own lake was almost too much to bear, but I maintained my poker face. "That sounds interesting. When's your next event?" He beamed with pride. "Our annual championship is next Saturday. Biggest event of the year, right on the East Shore. You should come by and see what we're all about." I thanked him for the invitation, already planning how I would use this upcoming tournament to gather more evidence of their trespassing. I thanked him for the invitation and was about to leave when I overheard Richard Wilkins speaking in hushed tones to Gerald and Karen Mitchell near the refreshment table. I busied myself with a cup of mediocre coffee, straining to hear their conversation. I couldn't hear everything, but the phrases "accelerate the timeline" and "deal with the Sullivan situation before it's too late" definitely reached my ears. Karen glanced in my direction and they lowered their voices further, moving away from the table. Whatever they were planning, it clearly involved my property, and they were concerned about my unexpected appearance. As I walked to my car, I decided to call Emma again and update her on what I'd learned. "They're definitely hiding something," she agreed. "The fact that Wilkins wouldn't directly answer your question about ownership is telling, and this timeline they mentioned, that sounds like they have some kind of development plan in the works. Let's go through those documents of yours tomorrow when I arrive." I was about to drive home when I noticed a sleek BMW pulling up beside me in the parking lot. The window rolled down to reveal Richard Wilkins himself. "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it?" I realized we weren't properly introduced. "I'm Richard Wilkins, president of the Maple Creek Estates HOA. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I understand you've recently moved into the old cabin on the lake. We should have a chat about bringing it up to community standards." I matched his fake smile with one of my own. "I wasn't aware that my property fell under your HOA jurisdiction, Mr. Wilkins." His smile didn't falter, but something flashed in his eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or concern. "All properties in this area are part of our community vision, Mr. Sullivan. We pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards. Your boat, for instance, is somewhat rustic for our tastes." He practically spat the word rustic, as if my grandfather's well-maintained fishing boat was somehow offensive. I decided to play dumb a little longer. "Is that right? And what authority does the HOA have over boats on the lake?" Richard's smile tightened further. "As I mentioned in the meeting, the lake is under HOA management. It has been for years." He waved his hand dismissively, as if this should settle the matter. I nodded thoughtfully. "That's fascinating, because according to my family's deed, Sullivan Lake is private property, owned by the Sullivan family since 1953. Has something changed that I'm not aware of?" For just a moment, Richard's mask slipped, and I saw a flash of genuine concern before he recovered. "There seem to be some misunderstandings about historical arrangements. Perhaps we should have our lawyers discuss this directly. In the meantime, I hope you'll comply with our request regarding your boat. It would be a shame to start our relationship on the wrong foot." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. I just smiled and told him I'd take his concerns under advisement. As he drove away, I had the distinct feeling that the battle lines had just been drawn. When I got home, I discovered that Richard Wilkins hadn't wasted any time. My boat was gone from the dock, with nothing but a property violation notice left in its place. The notice stated that the boat had been impounded for non-compliance with community standards and could be reclaimed after paying a $750.00 fine and signing a compliance agreement. The document specified that the boat would be considered abandoned and sold at auction if not claimed within 30 days. I was livid, pacing the dock and fighting the urge to drive straight back to Wilkins' office and confront him. Instead, I took several deep breaths and remembered what my grandfather always said. When you're angry, that's when you need to slow down and think clearer than ever. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who had been taking advantage of my family's property for years. I called the local sheriff's office to report the theft, only to be told that this was considered a civil matter between me and the HOA. The deputy I spoke with seemed uncomfortable, mentioning that these HOA disputes can get complicated and suggesting I try to work things out directly with the association. His reluctance to get involved made me wonder if the